What's up, YouTube? It's the one and only legend of winning, aka Low, and here we are, yet again, with the Houston Rockets being exited out of the playoffs before a finals appearance. Now, even though this is a reoccurring theme for this franchise, this year's disappointment will hit this team way harder than it did in prior seasons. And the reason for this just has to do with the level of commitment that we saw from the front office to this roster. The team a handful of years ago decided to move away from some key role players to bring in Chris Paul, which gave them a dual threat in the backcourt. And they went even further into that direction by trading Chris Paul this offseason to the Oklahoma City Thunder, as well as a few draft picks, and in return they received Russell Westbrook. But in the middle of the season, it became abundantly clear that Westbrook's greatest strength can also be a team's greatest weakness. Westbrook's ability to attack the basket is always married with the fact that he is not a great shooter. So the lack of spacing that was seen when both Westbrook and Capella were on the floor with one another forced Daryl Morey to go even further into this extreme style of play and depart from Clint Capella, bringing in even more sharpshooters, but more importantly, forcing this team to play in an unconventional way and go small. And the Lakers were the perfect team to test out the experiment. With the presence of Anthony Davis and also LeBron James, it was going to be extremely difficult to stop those two from entering the lane at will. But more importantly, could the Houston Rockets keep up a level of three-point shooting that would supersede the dominance of both Anthony Davis and LeBron, but also force the Lakers to make some adjustments that would go against their playing style? Well, the answers to that question became very clear by Game 3. And the Houston Rockets would inevitably lose a series in 5 games, which now has forced many people, including myself, to ask the question, what's next for Houston? And honestly, even though I don't want to be that guy, the obvious conclusion is to just trade everyone, because there's not really much that you can do. But before I explain why I came to that conclusion, I do want to make sure it is clear. This idea that James Harden or Russell Westbrook yet again have to receive the lion's share of the blame is ridiculous. And if anyone has been watching what Houston has been doing over the past 3 to 5 years, you will completely understand that James Harden's ball dominance and the style of play that we've seen from Houston is just a symptom of a bigger problem. But I'll touch upon that later on. Let me first explain to you why exactly the Houston Rockets really don't have any other choice but to blow it up. So first, some people believe that the Houston Rockets can just sign a player or two in free agency to make some adjustments and shake up the offense and revamp the style of play. That sounds nice, but the truth is that Houston doesn't have any more space on their payroll. Next year, the Houston Rockets already have $130 million committed to their payroll. Out of that $30 million, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Robert Covington, and Eric Gordon take up roughly around $110 million. And on top of that, in this upcoming free agency class, there are not that many talented pieces. Sure, it would be nice to get a Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka, or Paul Millsap, but the reality is, unless any of those players are willing to take a massive pay cut, there's no way that they can just sign on to the Houston Rockets as is. So obviously, the next line of thinking would be, what about trading a player? And even though that does sound nice as well, but if you look at the players, a lot of these pieces just don't have any value in the trade market. Austin Rivers and Ben McLemore are both on veteran minimums, making less than $3 million a year. A similar sentiment can be had for Daniel House, who is coming off a really good season, but only getting paid $3.7 million means that you're not going to get that much in return for him. Now moving on to the more impactful role players on this team. First you have PJ Tucker, who is going on 36 years old and is being paid less than $8 million a year. But to make it even worse, he's on the last year of his contract next year. So it's not like you're going to get that much value for a 36-year-old PJ Tucker who is only on 1 year left of his contract and getting paid less than $8 million. And then we move on to Eric Gordon, who is coming off of one of, if not the worst season of his career, will be 32 years old by December, and is under contract until 2024, and is being overpaid every year for the remainder of his contract. And oh yeah, let's also not forget that Eric Gordon is injury prone and even dealt with injuries this year. And then you have Robert Covington, who honestly has the most value out of all of these role players. He's only 29 years old, but will be 30 around December, and is getting paid roughly around $12 to $13 million for the rest of his contract, which is only 2 years. So that's a manageable contract with very manageable money and for a player who can be impactful for a lot of teams. But again, that still begs the question, what exactly do you get for Covington? Because honestly, Robert Covington is the type of player that you would want on this team. Finding a 3-and-D player in today's league is extremely difficult, especially one that is either consistent on the three-point line or can be healthy enough to give you some productivity in late postseason runs, which basically leaves us with Russell Westbrook and James Harden. Now, of course, if you are someone who believes that they should just revamp the offense, trading Harden is completely off the board. So when it comes to Russell Westbrook, you have to really ask the question, how valuable is Westbrook in the trading market? Now, I'm not going to sit here and make an argument that Westbrook has an unmovable contract, because after last offseason, with the amount of players that were moved, honestly, I don't really know what an unmovable contract is anymore. But when it comes to Russell Westbrook, even though it is really hard to say, it seems as if his trade value has gone down even further from last year. As Westbrook is not only a year older, he'll also be 32 by November and is coming off of one of the worst postseason runs of his career. Granted, he is coming off of a very serious quad injury and also he caught the virus. So I'm not trying to sit here and make a hot take that Westbrook is just hot garbage because of how poorly he performed during the playoffs. No, what I'm trying to do is paint a picture of the value of Russell Westbrook. At 32 years of age and being owed over $40 million each year for the next 3 seasons, and on top of that, we are talking about an uber athletic point guard who is sharply declining because he's dealing with injuries. All of that affects his value when it comes to his potential trade market. And even if you can find a few teams that may be desperate enough for a star of Russell Westbrook's caliber, what are they going to give in return to Houston that's going to be good enough to not convince them to just hit the restart button anyway? But now, as I say that, let me go back to who exactly we are going to blame. Because even though, yes, Harden should receive some type of responsibility for the lack of success within his time in Houston. And I am definitely up for blaming Russell Westbrook for his lack of evolution when it comes to his game, his poor decision making, and his inability to play off ball. And everyone else on the team who was playing inconsistent should definitely receive the blame as well. But personally, I believe that's just a cop-out for a bigger problem. And that problem is Daryl Morey and Mike D'Antoni. So first, when it comes to Mike D'Antoni, when are we going to have this conversation about D'Antoni and his lack of adjustments and his inability to make any deep postseason runs, despite the fact that he has coached some of the most talented teams in the past 15 years? Yes, James Harden has to play better, but if Kemba Walker is struggling from the field and can't get a good look off of pick and roll action, do you really believe Brad Stevens is going to keep running the same pick and roll action with Kemba Walker? No, he's going to run something different. He's going to make the adjustments. He's going to give Jason Tatum the ball on the wing, ISO him out, post up. He's going to run some floppy for Jaylen Brown. He's going to run some post plays or get some action in the post with Daniel Theis. It's going to be more than just the same thing over and over and over again. And the same thing can be said about Eric Spoelstra. The same thing can be said about Greg Popovich. The same thing can be said about Phil Jackson. The same thing can be said about most coaches in the league. They make adjustments when their star player is struggling. But for whatever reason, we just don't see that with Mike D'Antoni. And this doesn't even address the lack of attention that Mike D'Antoni gives to the defensive end of the floor as well. And so because of this, again, it now becomes a symptom that Harden plays poorly. Yes, Harden has bad series, but so does every star in NBA history. The difference is that their coach has the ability to identify that their player is having an off night, so they have to make a change so their bad performances isn't that impactful to the team's success. But when you lack that type of depth and complexity to your offense, all of the pressure is constantly put on the primary ball handler in Steve Nash or now James Harden to play perfect basketball almost every single night, and that is completely unrealistic. Now, some people may say, oh, well, just fire Mike D'Antoni. But see, now that brings us to the other problem, and that's Daryl Morey. Because yes, technically speaking, you can't just fire Mike D'Antoni and bring in someone like Nate McMillan or Mark Jackson, whoever you want to bring in to bring a little bit more adjustments, complexity to the offense, and depth to Harden's game in particular. However, what exactly is that going to do when the roster is made up the way that it is right now? See, the problem isn't just that the team doesn't make adjustments under Mike D'Antoni, but the bigger problem is that they don't even have the personnel to make said adjustments. Daryl Morey has purposefully acquired players who are specialists, who can only do one or two things. So no, you can't just sit there and say, hey, let PJ Tucker run some post-up plays. That's not how this works. So unfortunately, it's not as simple as, oh, just get a new coach and then just change up the offense, because you would have to change up the personnel. You have to go get other players who are versatile enough to make those adjustments. You have to go and change the entire roster if you want to receive the true potential of those adjustments that will be made in game from a new coach. And even for the people out there who want to make the argument that James Harden, if he really wanted a change, he would have demanded a change, and he's the reason why Chris Paul isn't there anymore, and he's the one who got into a back and forth with Kevin McHale, and he's the one who wanted Dwight Howard gone. All of that may be true, but guess what? James Harden is not the general manager. The same way that Kobe wanted Shaq gone and Shaq wanted Kobe gone, the GM and the brain trust of the Lakers looked both of them in their eyes and told them to figure it out with one another. Allegedly, LeBron James went to Pat Riley and told him, hey, I want Eric Spoelstra gone. You know what Pat Riley told LeBron James? He's your head coach. Figure it out. Even Michael Jordan was upset about a lot of the decisions that were made in Chicago, but he was still told to figure it out. Stars have demanded things throughout NBA history. That does not mean you all of a sudden drop everything that you're doing just to do what James Harden says he wants to be done for the team. That's not how that works, and it takes responsibility away from the general manager. But please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and notification bell, because I will be uploading more often on this channel over the next upcoming weeks, especially since the postseason is in full effect. And also make sure you click all the links in the description. Follow me on Twitter. I'll see you all next time. Peace.